Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. My name is Walt Thiessen, and today is Tuesday, January 15, 2013. Today, our special guest is Bill Guggenheim, the author of Hello from Heaven. He is a specialist in after-death communications, and he has a whole bunch of very fascinating stuff to tell us about today. Bill, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you all. Pleased to be your guest this morning.
We're glad to have you, too. Why don't you go back to the beginning? Tell us how you got involved in this whole concept in the first place, because it's not really a typical concept, a typical thing for people to get into.
Especially not in my case. I used to be a stockbroker and a securities analyst on Wall Street for two different small companies years ago. And I did not believe in life after death. I did not believe in God in the conventional religious sense. I was at least an agnostic. And I was raised to be very analytical and intellectual. And from New York City, from Long Island and Manhattan. And things like this were not possible. It was not possible to talk to someone who had died. The way I viewed the whole situation is that when a physical body died, or when a human body died, or any other animal or whatever, that our body is like a flashlight battery, and when the juice runs out, you throw it away. That's the end of it.
Okay.
And this mist, there's nothing more to it. Yes, I was raised Episcopalian to a degree, and then I was a Catholic convert in my late teens, briefly, mainly because of the girl I wanted to marry. And I did have some belief in there, but later on it had slipped away after that, pretty much. It's pretty hard in New York, and especially at Wall Street, to think in terms of spirituality and religion and whatnot.
Yeah, they are sort of very diverse, not diverse, but sort of opposite ends of a spectrum.
I would say so. It's pretty much about money, and this was way back a long time ago. I mean, today it's even worse. I don't think morality is something that's sorely lacking in the financial centers. But that's
I think most people would agree with that, yes.
Anyway, in my case, the simple answer is that my wife, Judy, and I were living in Jupiter, Florida, which is near the Palm Beach area.
I'm familiar with it.
One weekday morning, she said, "Come on in. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is going to be on the Phil Donahue show." And I had heard of her name, but I really didn't know who she was. But I found out very quickly that she had written all the books on the topic of death and dying. And which wasn't my favorite thing to watch, but when she spoke, she was riveting, and she really spoke about life and living, not about death and dying.
That's right.
She was very, very factual, and she stared right at the camera without blinking and just said whatever she wanted to say. And she was a very powerful woman. And the hour just flew by, frankly. It was just, had some commercials, I suppose, but whatever it was, I was intrigued enough to stay the hour and then went back to my office. And then, coincidentally, the same show was run on a cable channel 2 weeks later, and I happened to watch it with Judy then as well. Only this time it had or maybe it had it the first time, but I didn't notice it, but this time it had her name and address down at the bottom of the screen if you wanted to contact her for any reason. And feeling very magnanimous, I sat down a little bit later and wrote a check for $25 and sent it off to that address. That was sort of like you would do if the Girl Scouts came around to your house or any other kind of fun drive, in the neighborhood. You'd give a check, then $20, $30, $50, whatever you could afford. So I sent off a check for $25, sort of a pat in the back, my good boy thing to do for that day, and thought that would be the end of it. And never expected anything more. And much to my surprise, a few weeks later, I received a package in the mail which contained a set of audio cassette tapes called Lessons from the Dying Patient, and, much more importantly, an invitation to attend a 5-day workshop with her, with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Wow.
And what I didn't realize at that time was that people would try to get into these workshops for more than a year in advance, and they would fly in from anywhere in the United States or beyond. So this was something very, very prestigious and something people wanted, and I didn't know that. And at first I felt elated that somebody who was that well-known, a world-famous personality, had invited me to a workshop. On the other hand, as time went by, I realized if I went, I'd be taking the place of somebody in the medical field, such as a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, somebody who works with dying patients, perhaps. And I felt that I would just be, wasting their time, my time, doing that, because that was not my field. And so I waited till the last day of registration, and I called her office, expecting to speak to a secretary. But that particular day it was snowing in Illinois, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross answered her own telephone. And I recognized her voice immediately because she has a very heavy German-Swiss accent. Mm-hmm. And she remembered me. Said,
oh, wow.
She remembered me, and I went through my little thing about thank you very much, but please give my space away. Don't hold a place for me. Give it to somebody in the medical field who can, help dying people. And she said very simply, Bill, I think you should be there. And as I say when I say this in my workshops, this proves I'm a pushover for dominant women because I went into, well, Elizabeth, if you think so, I guess I will be. And as it turned out, the workshop was only 2 hours away. I was living at this point in the Sarasota area. I guess that's where I was called someplace. I'm sorry, not Jupiter. That was earlier. Anyway, over on the east coast of Florida. And it was no big deal for me to get there. And I went there in February 1977. And it turned out to be the 5 most joyous consecutive days of my entire life, because it was about life and living. And everybody was sharing their pain and their sorrow, their losses regarding death, divorce, health issues, every kind of loss you can imagine. And everybody was bonding. So by the end of the workshop, or before that, we all wanted to go off to some island together as a family, and then invite our own family members to join us. It was one of those tremendously bonding experiences. But the point of the story is that during it, she flew Raymond Moody down from Virginia to our workshop, and he spoke about near-death experiences, and 1 or 2 people had a near-death experience. But then a nurse spoke about how her daughter had died. She had been hit and killed by a car when she was out walking, and how she had this marvelous dream. It was more real than a dream, much more detailed than an ordinary dream, where she saw her daughter who had come to visit her, and the two of them had spent time together, and how much this had healed her. And I was very happy to hear the mother's account of her daughter visiting her. But when she used the phrase dream, my rational mind immediately discarded it and said, well, that's nice, but dreams aren't real, so that, wasn't real either. And she went on to say how her teenage son had been doing his homework one night, and he looked up and he saw his deceased sister, the same girl, his sister standing there, and he could see what she was wearing and was able to describe her, but that scared him, and he came running out of the bedroom into the living room and said, Kathy's there. And I thought about that a little bit, a teenage boy. Let's see, marijuana, and alcohol, and who knows what else. And, of course, I immediately blew that one off as well. And I didn't really listen. However, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross herself went on to describe how a patient of hers had come to her 10 months after the woman had died, and how Elizabeth had interacted with this woman because the woman's mission was to have Elizabeth not quit her research. There's a lot of opposition to Elizabeth's work in that she would go into large hospitals to ask to speak to the terminally ill patients and find out what they were feeling and what their needs were. And the viewpoint of the staff was everybody's well and going to go home. They may be sick at the moment, but they will get well and go home. And nobody's terminally ill. This was back in the 50s and 60s. And that's when the nurses would come and plump up the pillows and say, "Ma, you're looking better today, Mr. Smith." And, aren't you, your cheeks are so rosy, Mrs. Jones. And we're going to pull up the shades, and you're going to feel much better today, aren't you? That kind of stuff.
Okay.
And everybody was in denial, in other words.
That's right.
And obviously there were people who were very, very terminally ill. And Elizabeth would try to speak to them, and did, but the staff was in opposition, so she was going to resign from this hospital where she'd been working in Chicago. And the deceased patient came to her and said, "You must promise me not to quit your job, not to quit your research. It's too important." And Elizabeth looked at this woman who had died and remembered that there had been a minister involved. And she asked her, "Would you mind writing a note to your minister?" And the woman took a pencil, actually wrote a note with her handwriting, and gave it to Elizabeth for the minister. And once again, she extracted the promise from Elizabeth that she would continue her research and not quit, as she had been planning to do. And she went to the door and stood there in the hallway. That was it. And now Elizabeth had everything to lose and nothing to gain by sharing such a story with us. There were about 70 people in our workshop. And this, when she was finished, as I wrote in the book, if a pin had dropped, it would have sounded like a crowbar hitting a concrete floor. It would have been that, the room was that still, and would have been that noisy. And so I was absolutely mesmerized by hearing her story. So when I came home in 1977, I began looking for other experiences. Certainly, hers could not be the only one.
Let me interrupt you there for a second. Let me interrupt you for a second there, because what you're talking about is intriguing. You said earlier that first time that you'd called to cancel, the day before the big event had begun, you called to cancel, and she said...
I called to cancel the last day of registration.
The last day of registration, okay. And you said that she told you that she thought that you should be there, and I loved your accent that you did on that. But do you have any idea why she said that? Have you gotten any clue from her?
I have no idea except, to pull way back, and believe me, I didn't think this way back then, but I've been involved with this field now for 25 years, and with the research and writing a book and giving workshops and all this. I believe now that this was my spiritual work to do in this lifetime. I believe that Judy, my former wife, and as an example, Judy and I were married for 17 years. We have 3 sons. We were divorced in 1984. We began our research 4 years after we were divorced in 1988. And we worked for 7 years doing research and writing of the book.
Now, how did that come about, in that obviously there was something in the marriage that wasn't working? How did you stay friendly enough, or did you...
Okay, I hear your question. Initially, we were like every other couple, bicker, and with 3 sons, and saying, well, whose car is out in the driveway? I don't think it's right that somebody should be there overnight. All this kind of stuff. This was in the 80s, and things were pretty open. And we used to talk about having a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. We were like 2 knights battling each other. And one day, Judy said, why don't we put down our sword and our shield and just be 2 people? And I was very wary when she said it, but I said, okay, if you're willing to do it, I'm willing to do it. And we did. And from then on, we focused on not on our stuff, but on what is best for our 3 sons.
Okay.
They were young at that point, and they needed 2 parents. I mean, the oldest boy was I'm going to say 8 or 9, and then the next was about 4, and then about 3, something like that. Anyway, so they needed 2 parents, and we changed our whole parenting style and relationship style. Obviously, we were able to consider working together, and did for 7 years. I'm not saying that even working together was 100% easy all the time. It wasn't. It was not, which is true in any creative process. But we put our sons first and our own agenda second, and that's what made it possible.
That's still quite a transition to make, though. I mean, it can't be easy. That's the only thought that keeps going through my head. It can't be easy.
It wasn't easy, but I've known other people who do it. I've met or spoken to a number of people in my life who have said that my former wife or former husband and I are best friends now. And we're not seeing each other romantically or sexually or anything like that. We're just friends. And I've even met a couple of people who said we divorced in a very friendly way. It just it wasn't working for us to be married to one another, and we ended the relationship.
I'm curious also, during that time, did you guys have any ADCs of your own?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm. I remember I went to the workshop in 1977. 3 years later, our youngest son, Jonathan, who was not yet 2, had, I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit. Basically, it was a Sunday afternoon. We were living in Longwood, Florida, which is outside of Orlando, where we live now. And we had a house which had a screened-in pool. We were in the front of that house in the living room, and we had a conversation which just ended, and I got up to go somewhere, and I heard a voice in my head very clearly say, "Go outside and check the swimming pool." And I never heard a voice, very clearly in my head say anything. This was the first for me.
What was your reaction to that?
There was no sense of emergency or urgency. It just said check the swimming pool. So I got up and walked from the front of the house, the living room, through the middle of it to the back of it, which had sliding glass doors. There was a patio, and whenever you have a pool in Florida, you have a fence around it. So we had a wrought iron fence, and I noticed that the gate was ajar. So I opened the sliding glass door to go to the gate to close it, because our older boys use it as a shortcut to go through to the backyard. And when I did, I saw that our youngest son was floating in the deep end of the pool. That was Jonathan, who was not yet 2 years old, didn't know how to swim. And I screeched his name as I ran down the side of the pool. And for some reason, perhaps because I'd been a volunteer fireman in New Jersey for 3.5 years before that, I stopped and I took my shoes off. And as I did, I looked at Jonathan, and his eyes were wide open. He seemed to have a small smile on his face. He was not moving. He was on his back, and he seemed to be about a half an inch to an inch under the water, meaning his face was under the water. He was not breathing air. And I didn't know if he was dead or alive. And I jumped into the pool underneath him to push him to the side. And Judy came running out, and she had heard my screech of her name, and she grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him out. It was cold because it was May, and the water was chilly. And I was shivering, and so was he a bit. And he did not even require CPR. In about 15 to 20 seconds, he spit up water, and he was fine after that.
Wow.
He was fine. And I believe that was my father who spoke to me, and he had died in 1947 when I was 8 years old, which was 33 years earlier.
How did you come to the conclusion it was your father? Did you recognize a voice, or what was it?
It was by intuition.
Okay.
I cannot say I recognized the voice per se, but I believe it was my father.
Okay.
And if it wasn't, it still saved my son's life.
What kind of impact did that have on you afterward?
I have no idea how that went. I went into, angels and everything else.
Right.
But I believe it was my father.
But how did that impact you? That must have had a strong impact.
It did. Now, remember, even then, 1980, 3 years after this workshop. First of all, like, why didn't we do something with this field of research ourselves? Number one, I don't have any credentials, and to get published in these fields, you have to have usually an MD after your name, or at the very least PhD. A few people with master's degrees do get published, but not many. So I'm not a PhD. I'm not an MD, certainly. And so I figured, well, who's going to, if we did the research and wrote the book, nobody's going to publish it, because who are we? Just ordinary people. And that's the way I was thinking about it all those years. And I was, frankly, hoping to interest somebody else with the credentials to write the book, but nobody said yes. Nobody believed in it. And then one day, again in 1988, the same voice spoke to me and said, do your own research, write your own book. It's your spiritual work to do.
Wow.
And that left no ambiguity there. It said,
yeah, that's almost like a direct order.
Yes. And that's when I called Judy over. I was living in an apartment. I called her over and said, this is, I've heard this voice. I believe it's my father again. And would you be interested in doing this work with me? And even when she was there, because I put out a little bit of feelers before this, a phone call came in from a woman who I didn't know well. She told me about an aunt of hers who had been living up in Tallahassee, which is quite a distance from Orlando, and that a friend of hers had come to say goodbye to her. And she didn't know that the friend had already died. So the friend had visited her before she knew the friend had made her transition.
What kind of a visit are we talking about?
Literally came and she heard the woman's voice. I don't remember if she saw her or not, but she heard the woman's voice saying, thank you for being my friend. I love you. Goodbye. And then she found out afterwards the woman had died. And this is what I was looking for some degree of evidence, as I call it, that in some way that you could say that some of these experiences have some quality to them that makes them real, that you can prove that you learned something you didn't know before, or they happened before you learned that the person had died, or something of that nature. And we have 6 chapters in Hello from Heaven of exactly that type. The first one is where we call them ADCs, after death communications, before the news, and that's where you have the experience before you learn the person died. In other words, I'm in the East Coast. Let's say I'm in New York, and I have a friend in the West Coast, say California, and the friend comes and visits me during the evening and says, hi, Bill, thanks for being my friend. I appreciate all you did. I love you. Goodbye. Then the next morning, I receive an email or a telephone. People don't send telegrams anymore. But an email or a telephone, probably, call, telling me that the friend had been killed in a car accident. A sudden death, in other words. Something of that nature. So I had the experience before I learned that the person had even died.
The person was already deceased at the time they visited you.
Right, but I didn't know it.
Right.
I had no idea.
Right.
And it's a sudden death we're talking about, not a cancer or something of that nature.
Right.
And then another one, typically grief counselors say, well, these experiences are very common the first year or two. And yes, but what about when they occur 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years later, such as my father speaking to me 33 years later, we have to warn me of my child almost drowning. Okay, we have a whole bunch of those in the book too. We call them ADCs, long after the event, long after the death.
You're talking about you're talking about this whole series of things that these events that you're experiencing, and you were telling us earlier how you worked on Wall Street. I mean, that's a huge leap. That's a big journey to take, so to speak. And it just keeps occurring to me that must have been quite formative in some way. I mean, to make that much of a transition in your own life, that must have been quite a thing.
Well, I was a stockbroker, but I was more of a securities analyst, so I was an analytical person, and I loved getting pieces And remember, what you're trying to do in Wall Street is figure out if the stock is selling at X number of dollars per share, is it undervalued or overvalued?
Right.
And so I was very good at getting information and then figuring out, what the meaning of it is. And that's exactly what it took to collect these experiences. What I'd like to do is give a definition of our work, because I think that's the important thing here.
Okay.
And that is an ABC, or an after-death communication. This is our definition, our specific one. It's a spiritual experience that occurs when someone is contacted directly and spontaneously by a loved one, meaning a family member or a friend who has died. Okay? Directly means there's no third party involved. There's no psychic, no medium, no hypnotist, no Ouija board, no equipment, no nothing. It's direct communication between the one who died and the living person. And spontaneously means that you can want it to happen, and many people do, but the one who has died chooses when, where, and how to contact us. So these very simple guidelines determined who we would interview and whatnot. And over the next 7 years of research between 1988 and 1995, we interviewed over 2,000 people, and we collected more than 3,300 first-hand accounts of after-death communication.
Now, what methods did you use to find these people or to have them find you?
Okay, some of this is going to get into your law of attraction.
We're not against that.
First, I would go anywhere I could. I'd go out in the evenings to any kind of a group, whether it be a church group or a social group, a Course in Miracles or a meditation group or a yoga group, or you name it. Any place I could get to speak for 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the group. And I'd get permission from the leader in advance. And that's what I did. And my goal was to find 10 people a week to interview. And I did. And I could tell who had had an experience just simply because as I spoke, I could watch their heads nod up and down or their eyes shine. In some way they were smiling, making contact. But I always had to go up to them to get their name and phone number. And then after that, we got into bereavement newsletters. We'd have a little announcement in there. But one of the things that happened that was synchronous here is a woman from California, or used to be from California, named Patricia Sun, who is well-known out there. And she came to Naples, Florida, and I went to a workshop of hers at the very beginning of our work. And when I was there, Naples is quite a ways from the Orlando area.
Yes.
And I met a woman who worked for the St. Petersburg newspaper at that time. She was a reporter. And told her who I am and what I was going to be doing and whatnot. And I didn't think anything more of it. But as it turned out, 1 year after we began doing our research in 1988, in 1989, we were invited by a group called the Compassionate Friends. They were going to have their national conference in Tampa, Florida, which is only 2 hours away. And they needed somebody else had dropped out. So they needed a fill-in speaker. Would we be willing to do that? And so we said yes, although we really didn't know what we were talking about yet after only 1 year. And we had only interviewed 500 people by then. But we went anyway, and the very first workshop remember, the Compassionate Friends is for bereaved parents. They're all bereaved mothers and fathers and some siblings and whatnot, and grandparents. We had over 300 people in the room at our first workshop. And we were so afraid of saying it wrong, saying that we would upset them because we were not bereaved parents. But everything went very well. And then we had another workshop the same day with more than 200 people in it.
Wow.
And what we didn't really realize, I think I'd let this woman know, but the reporter who I met at the Patricia Sun workshop, she came to our workshops at this conference with a photographer, and they wrote a beautiful story with color photographs even, which were printed in the St. Petersburg newspaper. And we got copies of that because that validated our research so much. And from then on, we made photocopies of all that. From then on, we always gave that out everywhere we went. And everybody took our work very seriously, which it was. And it was one of those synchronous events that you could not have planned, to have a reporter with a photographer there from major newspaper.
Exactly.
And that helped us tremendously. And then we had other newspaper stories as we were doing the research. We had one that originated here in Orlando, and that one syndicated in 28 other newspapers throughout the United States and Canada. And the article contained our name and address and phone number. So we had letters pouring into us, and the phone was so busy that if I was on the phone and hung up, before I could get my hand off the phone, it rang again. So I just let the answer machine take the calls. We had over 600 responses to those articles from that one story in the Orlando newspaper. And that's what we were in the tabloids, which sounds pretty cheesy, but really it just reaches a different audience. And we had handwritten letters with pencil, paper, ripped out of a notebook or inexpensive pads from some of these people who are readers of the tabloids. And their experiences, in some cases, were very beautiful and very touching. And we interviewed them. So you just never knew which people you hear from. But nevertheless, over the 7 years, it was over 2,000. We could have, I spoke to everybody. We could have interviewed 4,000 or 5,000, but as a matter of priorities. And because I spoke to everybody before we interviewed them, and I had 10 women doing the interviews. And at that time, as a matter of cost, it was 15 cents a minute per phone call, and the average interview was 45 minutes, and on and on and on. So
sure,
we got everything we needed for our book and more.
It's interesting, too, that the whole thing kind of seemed to snowball on its own the way you're describing it.
Not only that, now this is going to sound a little mystical, but in a way, we never saw the entire picture that we were creating. I'm thinking of a stained glass window or a mosaic. It's only when the entire book was finished we could stand back and look and see the beautiful stained glass window with all the different colors, different pieces, different sizes, different shapes, different thicknesses of glass, and the beautiful composite picture that these stories composed. And I can say the same thing as a mosaic, same description. And again, I don't believe we did it ourselves. I believe this came through us to a large extent. In other words, it's not Judy and Bill Guggenheim, but rather we were vessels, agents for this material to come through us into book form and in a particular sequence that would be acceptable to the public. And we always wrote the book, by the way, for the general public to read, not for the academic level, because we knew that since we didn't have credentials, they wouldn't take us seriously anyway.
Sure.
So we wrote the book for the ordinary person who's grieving, who's lost a loved one, such as a spouse or a child, or some. I'd say more bereaved parents than anybody else. We wrote it for them, for their benefit. And we were giving workshops from this 1 year afterwards on, all through the rest of the research. And frankly, it was a little embarrassing because people say, well, where's your book this year? And I kept saying, well, next year. Well, where's your book? Well, not here yet. Well, where's your book? Is it ever coming out? Yes. And even here, I did have a friend, and I contacted her. I knew we self-published Hello from Heaven, 5,000 copies eventually. And that's a lot of copies. And we left 4,000 up in Virginia with an 800 number, and they distributed the bulk of them by telephone. And then we gave copies to everybody we interviewed who's in the book. And I've had other copies we sold directly in Florida. But people said, well, you need to get it published, you need to get it published by a regular publisher. And I said, okay, well, I'll try to get an agent. And I spoke to a woman in Washington, D.C., who was a literary attorney and a literary agent. And she said, Bill, after you sell 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is copies, you'll have some buzz, and come back to me then, and then I'll have something to, talk to the publishers about. And we published our book in October 1995. As it turned out, she had one copy in her backpack, and she was visiting a publisher in New York, and the publisher said, or the editor said, what's that? I want to see that. And she had to give a copy of our self-published book to that editor. She wound up giving two other editors, asked her, what else are you working on? And she said, well, I've got this book, Hello from Heaven. That she wasn't playing it up. That's all, I want to see it. And finally she had to give a fourth copy away to the one at Bantam Books, who, just to make it equal, she had to treat all her editors equally. And as it turned out, within 2 months, we had a contract with Bantam Books in 1996.
Amazing.
In 1995, within 2 months of our self-publishing it. And even though she had told us it wouldn't happen for many months or a year.
It definitely sounds like law of attraction at work.
And it's certainly something.
This definitely was. There was an energy behind this, a consciousness and energy, a spirituality behind Hello from Heaven, all the way from beginning to end. And it still goes on.
For people who don't know, too, when you self-publish a book, there are literally hundreds of thousands of books that get self-published each year. So for a book of any kind to have this kind of reception by a major publisher 2 months after it was self-published is almost close to miraculous.
Not only that, but there was a bidding war on our book.
Wow.
Bantam Books and Simon Schuster.
Fantastic.
Two more companies, but it had snowed very heavily in New York City that day, so only two of them got there. But they bid it up very high, and it's worked out beautifully.
Wow. That's just an amazing story.
More
all by
important, I
itself.
want to say it worked out for Hello from Heaven. Us is not important. Hello from Heaven is important.
Well, congratulations anyway.
Now, where did it go after that? I mean, now you're published. You've got some major backing behind you as a result of that. Where did it go? What transpired from that point on?
Basically, what I have done since I more than Judy, but since 1989, I've been giving workshops for 24 years. And,
wow, that 24 years worth of workshops. Wow.
Wherever I was, okay, now I want to tell you, my name is Guggenheim, and yes, I inherited money. So even the money was arranged before I was born to be able to finance this work and to do it. And I never charged for the workshops. And I traveled all over, all the 50s. I did go to all 50 states, but I traveled to certainly California and Canada, and many states, many times, as I gave workshops wherever I was invited, mostly to conferences of bereaved parents, but also to other hospice, conferences as well, and all kinds of different things here, there, and elsewhere. But my heart went out to bereaved parents more than anyone else, and I have 5 children. I became a bereaved father a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago myself.
Sorry to hear that.
My 47-year-old daughter took her own life, which was not unexpected because of her previous attempts and whatnot, but this
still.
was final. And I can say this, that as I mentioned earlier, experiences having saved my son Jonathan from drowning. In this case, I've heard from my daughter Janet several times, and the last time I had what is called a vision, an internal vision. In other words, I'm seeing her with my eyes closed, but I actually saw her with my eyes closed and open, dancing and showing me how she's feeling. She was sort of turning in a circle and at the same time twirling her whole body around and dancing and letting me know that she's fine and well now. This was not immediately after she died, but a number of months later, or a year later, roughly.
Mm-hmm. What a great gift.
Yes, this spared me the tremendous amount of grief because I had communication with her shortly after she died. And basically she was making a movie when she died. And by the way, so it's not too mysterious. What had happened was she was on antidepressants, and somebody had convinced her to give them up cold turkey. She didn't need them anymore. One of those health people who, not a professional, but somebody who knew it all, and convinced her that she could go off her antidepressants all at once, and she did. And then what happens is like the floor just falls out from underneath you into a black, endless black abyss, and that's where you start to fall. And that's when she took her life because you can't go off those kind of drugs, cold turkey all at once, ever. That's just the worst thing you can do. Anyway, that's what she had done. And I think if she hadn't done that, she would have stayed around. But anyway, that's second-guessing the situation.
Sure.
But she is working with children with art, and that was her thing. She had written several books. And people, your listeners, if they're interested, they go to Janet, Jaenet, Janet, JAENET.net. And there are several books that she's written and illustrated that her mother has put on this beautiful website.
Oh, well, that's a nice legacy.
And created a beautiful website for Janet's books and whatnot. Anyway, I've heard from her, and I'm doing fine. And guess this kind of story helps other bereaved parents know that they can get to this space too.
And you continue to do the workshops and continue to do the work even now.
Oh, yes. It's not something you retire from. I'm still, right today, I'm reading a book. I just found it. I'm not even into it enough, but it's called A Hug from Heaven, Messages from the Soul, for the Soul from the Light. And it's about a woman who receives communications from her deceased father. And there are a lot of books like this out here. Mm-hmm. And they inspire me to go further. And I'm thinking, I have an idea of taking this to another level, but I'm not ready to discuss that yet. But, well, I can say one of the things we may do is there is a way to help people have these experiences. And we're thinking of maybe offering a workshop on that.
To actually induce the experience?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting.
In other words, you're not telling them who will come, but that they may have an experience.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And
right.
It's not mediumship or anything like that. It's allowing them to have an experience on their own.
Which is what a lot of mediums will tell us, that we don't need them. We can have the experience ourselves.
Yes.
But a lot of people rely on a third party to do the transmission as opposed to just being the receiver themselves.
Yeah, well, which is good and bad. I mean, I don't want to get into mediumship. That's not part of our work. I do respect the work of John Edward. I studied with a woman named Reverend Ann Gaiman here in Florida. But the trouble is with a large field of mediumship, many of the people are not trained. And as a result, they make mistakes in not what they say, but how they say it. And the worst one I heard was a woman who just blurted out to a man, "Oh, I see your father's going to die within 6 months." Well, the man was very close to his father, and this absolutely terrorized him. And he was not ready to hear anything like that at all. And that's what can happen if you're not trained. I mean, maybe that's an extreme case, but if those mediums who go through a spiritualist church have 3 years of training, and then they have to be certified by NASD or NASC, National Association of Spiritualist Churches. And I think Morris Pratt offers a course where you are also certified. But so many people wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to be Madame Catherine," so to speak, or something like that. And that's unfortunate,
now,
in my opinion.
You've been doing a lot of this constantly now for, 25, 30 years now, when you include the time that you were doing the interviews leading up to your book. during that time, you must have gotten all kinds of responses, everything from people being totally grateful to people being totally skeptical. Can you just characterize a little bit of each of the camps that are involved, the people that you've talked to? What kinds of reactions have you gotten?
I think it's interesting. When we were doing our research, people mailed us Bibles. They both mailed us the Book of Mormon. They mailed us religious tracts. This was about a book that hadn't even been written yet.
Yeah.
And they were only one person had a return address on it, but they were saying that we're leading people down the wrong pathway to sin and Satan and all this stuff. And we hadn't read it. We hadn't written anything. Nothing.
Right.
But once our book was out, we didn't receive any more of this. It stopped.
Really?
And because our book is a spiritual book, there are accounts in the book of people with Jesus or Mary, in some cases, and it just is a very uplifting book, and all that negativity or fear, it's just that negativity is just fear. All that fear just drifted away, just melted.
That's really interesting, because I mean, the average person thinking about this might say, well, they're going to get the biggest amount of resistance after they publish, but not so. You got your resistance before.
No, the only negative thing I had was I was doing an interview by telephone to a radio station in Canada, and I didn't know it, but this was a setup. The man himself was an avowed atheist, and he actually wrote for an atheistic atheist magazine. And no matter what I said, it wasn't about me and our book or anything. From his point of view, none of it could be true because there is nothing. There is no God, there is no afterlife, nothing. And that was his position. And he was pulling me into argument, and I don't argue with people. I don't like that. You know, if you don't believe it, fine. That's your choice. I'm not here to convert you. There's nothing to convert you to. And that was the only case I remember that was unpleasant. And he went on to write a long article that was on the internet. But so be it.
How about on the positive side? Tell us about some of the more positive reactions you've gotten.
Oh, the most positive ones. The one that touches me the most is a letter from a 13-year-old girl who said how she had read the book cover to cover on her own and how much it had helped her after the death of her brother. 13-year-old girl.
Wow.
And we received a number of letters from children and all kinds from adults thanking us. And it's something I try not to get caught up in because it can lead to ego, and I don't want that. It's just an acknowledgement for the book. But we know how much it has helped bereaved parents. Here's my ultimate one that we've heard many times, and that is, Hello from Heaven has helped me more than any other book I've read about on the topic of grief.
Oh, my.
Oh.
That's quite an endorsement.
For many people, especially bereaved parents, but Hello from Heaven has helped them more than any other book they've read. And it's because it's not just the experiences of after-death communication in there, but the way we've written it in a very positive way, a very uplifting way, addressing the issues of grief as well. It teaches people a lot about grief and bereavement and loss, and the joy that can occur if there is contact, if there is confirmation that life continues. Because what everybody always want to know is if someone we love dies, makes their transition, leaves their physical body, whatever you want to call it, is that we will have a joyous reunion with them again when it's our turn to do the same, to leave our body. And that they will be there to meet us and maybe even to greet us when we die, and in some cases to help us when we die. Now, we have several categories of experiences we did not publish in Hello from Heaven, and just not here, as much as, and it's a 400-page book as it is. But one of them is that when people are dying, you have people who see the family, the ones who have died, come to help a dying person make their transition. In other words, they're assisting a patient who's dying in the final hours to leave their body and to go on.
Escort them.
And we have those. We call them bedside experiences. Then we have a whole lot of experiences of seeing the soul leave the body. And one of the most touching ones I can tell you very briefly is that a husband and wife had a little 2-year-old son of theirs sitting in the emergency waiting room at a large hospital, waiting to be seen. And while they were waiting, unfortunately, in this big city like Chicago, but I'm not sure which city, the child died, their son died. But they both saw his spirit, his soul, his essence leave his body. They saw it at the same time, and they saw him leave. They felt him leave, and they felt a love coming from that son of theirs. Mm-hmm. And they were both, I won't say okay in the sense everything's fine, but they were so much better off because they could both see at the same time the little boy leave his body and go toward the light. And that made a huge difference for them.
I actually know somebody who had a similar experience when I think it was when his father died. He and his siblings were in the room, and they all saw exactly what you just described. And he didn't really talk about how it impacted him, but it clearly did impact him. Just you could tell from the way he was telling the story.
We have some accounts, and I haven't looked at these recently here, but we have them in our file boxes, of like up to a dozen people being in a circle, seeing the same person, typically this soul leave the body and form into the likeness of the person. It will look like them, but it won't be in physical form. And sometimes they'll thank some of the people there for helping them, for being there, and things like this. And there's 1 or 2 way communication possible. And then the spirit, soul, just sort of like Superman, that goes up through the ceiling or up through the window.
In fact, I'm just realizing that there's actually a story of a famous person who passed that way. George Harrison, the former Beatle, when he passed, his wife reported the exact same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, she said the room was full of light and there was not an electrical light on in the room, that his spirit just lit up the room.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's another phenomenon. There are quite a few phenomena that happen when there is a transition, a death, a passing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the part of the story you were going on to next, but I just wanted to put that one in there.
No, I'm happy you did. That's why, because what's amazing is how all these stories are around us, but we don't focus on them. We just think, it's one of those things. Isn't that odd? Isn't that unusual?
Right.
We tuck it away, but we don't connect the dots.
And that's what's so cool about what you guys did, what you and Judy did, because you started connecting dots by putting together basically a large aggregate of these stories all in one place, and people begin to see, oh, there really is a pattern going on here.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, I know you have a plan that you didn't want to go into detail about just yet. You kind of gave us a hint, but are there any plans that you have that you can tell us about? What do you see happening in the next, say, 2 or 3 years or so? Where do you think your journey is taking you?
Actually, I'm at a crossroads right now, and I was very involved with a book called Proof of Heaven, which is now #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction, written by Evan Alexander III, M.D., neurosurgeon. I was very instrumental in working behind the scenes with his book for over a year. I wrote the foreword to a book by the Horsleys, Gloria and Heidi Horsley, who are very well known in the bereavement community. And I've written endorsements for several other books. And it's like I need to take a break for a little while.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, you've been busy.
And I don't know what my next step will be. I'm waiting to find out, and I'm just letting go of this now, and then I'm going to wait and see, because I feel I will be led to whatever is next, and I'm not sure.
So you're basically leaving yourself open for whatever comes, and when it comes, you're hoping you'll just know what it is and you'll recognize it.
Yes, yeah, that's the way this has worked all along, and it's been very joyous. I mean, this is not something you could pay me to do. Or it's a joy, it's a privilege, It's uplifting. It's my work. It's my growth. It's my spirituality. It's whatever I've given, I've received multi times. It's that kind of thing. I mean,
you speak as if you feel like you're a very blessed person.
I am. I have been. And so is Judy. We are. And
very good.
Yes, the book helps others, and it's lovely to hear their feedback and things like that, and to receive their accounts and all that. But this is what I believe. I believe that those people who are fortunate, have come here to do something, and they have found out what it is, and now they're doing it. And very likely that's what your thing is doing with this radio program you have. A way to disseminate a lot of information to a lot of people, and to open minds, open hearts.
Yep, that's true. And to reach out to the ones who are already open.
Yes. And that in turn inspires them to do something more. To me, life is very much like, it's a very simple thing, and I don't know who originated it, but we with one hand, we're reaching ahead of us to hold the hand of the person in front of us, and with the other hand, we're reaching behind us to the person at our back. And it's kind of a daisy chain that way.
That's an interesting image. Okay. Before we end this, give people some places where they can go to learn more about what you and Judy have done, and other information on the topic.
Well, we have our website, of course. The main thing is reading Hello from Heaven. By the way, it's only $7.99. It's a paperback book, so it's very inexpensive.
Okay.
And you can get it at the Barnes and Noble stores. Still carry it, and Amazon has it. And it's been out, I think, 16, 17 years now. And so it founded the entire field of after-death communication. It founded it, named it, everything. And we're very proud of that. And we have a website, www.after-death.com. So it's after-death.com, which is after-death communication in this case.
Sure.
And that's what the book's about. Okay. And there are 12 different categories. I didn't go through them all, but there are 12 major categories. And each chapter contains about 15 experiences. So there are 353 first-hand accounts of after-death communication in Hello from Heaven. And even the structure of the book's an unusual one. I mean, no book contains this many first-hand accounts. And these are all short stories. I mean, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's not excerpts. It's not people who are experts taking one line from here and one line from there and weaving it together to prove their point. Well, we wrote it this way for one purpose. We wanted the reader to be, frankly, overwhelmed as we were with experiences. We wanted them to read them and arrive at their own conclusions. What do they think they are?
Are you still collecting experiences from people? I mean, is there a way that people should send stuff to you?
People mail them to us or email them to us. We read them and we set them aside. If we're not sure what we're going to do with them, in some cases we share them with other interviewers.
Okay.
At least 30 books that we know of, more than that actually, have been written about this field. About half of them are by experiencers, and the other half by researchers.
Okay.
So no two books are similar or the same.
That's true.
I guess they're similar, but not the same. And that's interestingly, though, there has never been a documentary made about this field. Near-death experiences, yes. Many documentaries, many articles, everything else, but none has ever been written. There's never been a documentary, meaning a video or television made on after-death communication, and yet they appear in movies all the time and things of that nature.
It's interesting.
And
so it's almost as if they found a way to be found.
They're there, but they're not. Nobody's ever made a video or TV or just a documentary you buy to watch as a DVD.
Yes. Not a systematically organized thing.
Nobody's ever written an article for a national magazine. That's never happened either.
Really?
After all these years, yes.
Wow, that's surprising.
It is to me.
That is really something.
And people approach me about doing it, but they haven't made a video yet. And wouldn't be hard to do ever happened.
Well, video, I mean, I've actually done work with video, and there is a lot of work in that, in addition to the actual collecting of whatever it is that you're doing. I'm a little bit surprised, though, that nobody's written any magazine articles in a major magazine. That's a little bit surprising.
It's very surprising. Yes.
Yeah.
It's very, I suspect that this is going to sound a little bit strange, but I think if I had been an MD, it would have happened. Again, I'm going back to Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven, which is a book about his near-death experience. Because he's a neurosurgeon, that's why it's getting so much publicity. And it's number one right now.
Yeah.
And that's too bad that if you don't have those letters after your name, you aren't taken as seriously.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Because, and it's the media who loves the MD credentials. And all the books on near-death experiences, on the research end of it, are written by, that have done well, are written by medical doctors. Mm-hmm. And I know them personally, Raymond Moody and Melvin Morris and Jeffrey Long. And only a few researchers, actually only a few experiencers, Betty Eady and Danny and Brinkley and a couple of others, have gotten much publicity for their work.
Right.
But it's very, very few.
Well, Bill, we want to thank you so much for joining us on the program today. I mean, it's been very fascinating to hear your story, and we want to also thank you for sharing the contact information so people can check into what you've done in the past and what you're continuing to do. Any last message you want to leave with the audience before we go?
There's one other website that people may enjoy going to. It's called Eternia, ETERNEA.org. ETERNEA.org. It's huge, and it's filled with information about STEs, spiritually transformative experiences. And that's near-death experiences, after-death communications, out-of-body experiences, remembrances of past lives, and other things of that nature. And this is founded by Eben Alexander, and a friend of mine named John Odette, and it's designed to be a website that will make huge changes in human consciousness.
All right.
About beliefs about life after death and the purpose of our being here and things of that nature. It's not religious, it's spiritual.
Very good.
And if they'd like to visit that, there's a whole section developed just to our field of after-death communications.
Bill Guggenheim, the author of Hello from Heaven. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Walter and Louise. I've enjoyed being your guest.
We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.